Parshas Bechukotai, Behar-Bechukotai. So when deciding what to talk about with this week's parsha, it's hard to pass up on the Rashi of this week's parsha, of Parshas Bechukotai. Rashi says, the famous Rashi, in Bechukotai Telechu, Yachol Zakiyam mitzvahs, baby, you would think this is referring to being Makayim any mitzvah. But we know Kiyam mitzvahs already said. Hamani Mekayim in Bechukotai Telechu. So what do we do with Bechukotai if we already covered all the mitzvahs? Shetu Amelim B'Torah. They should be Amel B'Torah. And I remember I had a Rebbe in a certain yeshiva. I remember when he got to these words of Rashi, he said, I just remember because it stood out a lot, he said, Rabbi Yisai, this is our Rashi. He said, he's like, we're in yeshiva, we're in yeshiva, this is ours. This doesn't belong to anyone else. There's other Rashis they could take, but this one's ours. And if anyone got offended by that, it wasn't mine, it was his line. And if you liked it, then I was just saying it over. So, but anyways, that was his line. He said, B'nai Yeshiva, this is ours. If there's anything, there's 1 week we could take out Rashi that's ours. Who's doing it? It's B'nai Yeshiva. Who's the ones we're Isaac V'Torah called Yom V'Layla. But Lamais, it's an interesting thing. We find there's a special emphasis to toil, to work hard, to be Amel B'Torah. Think about what Rashi is saying here, that the Medrash is saying. That there's a mitzvah to be Amel B'Torah, to work hard at it. Not just to learn Torah, to be Amel. We don't find this by any other mitzvah as far as I am aware. If it comes to tzedakah, there's not a separate inyan of being Amel B'Tzedakah, or Shiluch HaKain, or Tzitzis, Lulav, writing a Sefer Torah, anything you think of. There's not a separate mitzvah. Sometimes the mitzvah might be strenuous, but a separate thing to work hard at that mitzvah. So we have to understand Pshat. What is the Pshat? Why is the Torah telling us to work hard at it, to be Amel B'Torah? What is the inyan? To strengthen the kasha, which is why some people are asking, why do I have a tour here? For the following reason, you'll find out right now. The tour brings the famous Machlokes Rishayim about what's the nusach of Birchas HaTorah and Siman Mem Zayin. So, the first shita that the Torah brings down is that Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvahs of Itzvanu Al Divrei, I'll say Torah, because that's what Achinu Asfaradim Kacha Noagim, I choshev. Yeah, they also speak English, but whatever. Okay, and then there's the Torah goes weiter, says Benusach Ashkenazis. The Ashkenazi nusach is Lasik B'Divrei Torah, and that's I think the majority of this room, as far as I'm aware, it says. So what's pshat in Lasik? What's pshat in the two different lashinas? So the Bach, very chashav Bach says, and this is what I wanted. He says pshat in why it's Lasik. Why do we make a bracha of Lasik B'Divrei Torah? He says, listen to these words. Nired lefisha ikar havtacha shiftichanu hu yisbarach. The ikar havtacha that Hashem gave us about all the brachas in this week's parsha, about klapi limud Torah, l'haisa ela al eisek haTorah hu ha'amal ve'haTorach. The ikar, the brachas that Hakadosh Baruch Hu promises us is only if we're amal and torach in limud Torah. K'moisha kasav in Bechukotai Telechu shetiu amelim b'Torah. Fine. So you see already from there, weiter, you see from this Bach, that the reason why we make a bracha of Lasik B'Divrei Torah is there's an inyan of working hard and toiling in Torah. I still have not addressed why that is, but we see there's a separate component when it comes to limud Torah that we don't find by any other mitzvah. Finally, another great Marmakim is the Gemara Megillah. I think the well-known Gemara Megillah on Daf Gimel, that over there the Gemara says that when first it talks about Onkelos was Matargim Chamisha Chum Torah, and then came Yonasan ben Uziel, and he wanted to be Matargim Nevi'im, all of Navi. And what happens? The Gemara says, Nizdaza, very good. Nizdaza Aretz Eretz Yisrael started shaking. Arba Me'as Parsa, the Parsais, they started shaking. And the Gemara goes on to say that Eretz Yisrael was shaking when he wanted Matargim, and therefore Yonasan ben Uziel was not Matargim. What's shot? That wasn't Matargim. So Rashi actually doesn't say there. But if you look at the Tosfos Rid, the Tosfos Rid says, because if he would have been talking about one of these words, actually, it's chashuv words. Says the Tosfos Rid, Perish the Kavan the Kasav Targuma the Cry Lay Masri Nafshay Milfinu Kidmikara. If he would have been Targim the Sukkim, then people would not learn and have to be Meister Nefesh in their limud like they would have beforehand. Because when you have the Targum, when you have the Taich, it's much easier and they don't have to work as hard. But we want them to work hard. So what's this concept about working hard? By the way, that was one of the big discussions amongst the Gedolei Yisrael when they were translating the Gemaras. That was a whole discussion, taking away from. It was a what's it called? Give me a word. Backwards and forwards. Okay, that's a British way of saying it. I was going to say more of like they had to weigh their seesaw, backwards, forwards, seesaw. Okay, both good. They had to basically weigh out. On one hand, it's going to be helpful, so many more people can learn. On the other hand, it takes away from the amelis. So what's this concept of amelis? Why do we want it so badly? Agav, if you have time over Shabbos and you're a little bit bored, there's an Orach Chaim HaKadosh who gives 42 mahalchim to this discussion of Pshat in Shetiu Amelim HaTorah. I see some people are getting very excited about this. We'll see you on Sunday when you have all 42 written down. So, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, I want to answer Reb Chaim Shmulevitz somewhere else, but in Sichas Musar, he says an idea, Klapi Amelis. What's the concept of Amelis? Working hard at something. So he says, the more that a person is amel in something, and you work hard at something, and you put in effort, so the more your ava, the more you gain a love towards that thing. The more you give over of yourself to something, or to a person, so the more you feel connected to that person. So the tzivoy be'etzem of Amelis b'Torah is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually being mitzavas to love my Torah. I want you to love it. And how do you love it? By working hard at it. You work hard at it, you'll love it. L'mashal, if you have a parent, the parent obviously there's a natural love, hopefully, but there's also an amazing, the love gets stronger through the parent always giving over to the child. The child gives very little back to the parent in the beginning. But the parent is constantly giving to the child. Kol shekain, if you have sometimes people, but a person has child with special needs, so that child especially cannot really give very much back to the parent, but the parent, by giving so much to that child, feels very connected. If any of us worked on HASC, just a plug here for HASC, it's for you. So we can relate to that a little bit. Okay, maybe not. So anyways, Al Derech Zed, the Bali Musar, and the Orchos Tzadikim, and others, they all bring that how can a person wants to grow in their avas chinam towards a friend, they say by giving over. If you give to that person and you're moiser nefesh and you try to invest in that person, you'll get closer to them. And you'll naturally start to like them more. So this is the Pshat. Reb Chaim Shlomo says this is the Pshat in the Gemara Nida. The famous Gemara Nida says that a child, when it's his mother's stomach, learns kol HaTorah kula. So why not be born that way? So everyone knows, because then he wouldn't have come through Amelis. He can't just, says Reb Chaim Shlomo, that's the Pshat. He wouldn't have avas HaTorah if he was just born with kol HaTorah kula. He never worked hard for it. He never gained it, never grew through that love to love the Torah. Yeah, he has all the ideas, but he never grew through the love of Torah. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. Ein chanami. Sometimes learning can be very difficult. Right? First of all, each person has to put Amelis in different ways. For some people, it might be coming on time. Some people, it might be I'm just absolutely exhausted. For some people, it might be they have different thoughts in their head that are just in the way and they have to push that away. That also takes Amelis to push that away. For some people, it's a mazel tov. They have a son or a daughter born and they have to push to still be at Seder. For some people, it's parnasa, and there's many more things we could think of where Amelis comes in. But Amelis is that you push, and anyone who's grew in Limud Torah is because they pushed through so many different circumstances to be able to learn. The Chafetz Chaim, it's Yadua that I've heard from many different, and here personally I saw from many different Talmidim that they wrote that when they would go to the Chafetz Chaim for a bracha, they saw many times he said the same thing, which is he would say to them, why are you coming to me? I'm just flesh and blood and you're coming to me to get a bracha. He said, it already says, if you're Amal B'Torah, you'll get all the brachas in Parshas Bechukotai. You don't come to me. Why are you coming to me? Just learn. Rabbi Akiva Eiger, it's brought that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, he asked before he was nifter, he asked what should be written on his kever. And he asked that the only thing, I heard this from Rav Asher Eli. He said the only thing he wanted to be written on his kever was, Lamad Torah mitoich tsaras rabim. That he learned Torah even through many, many different tsaras. He had many different tsaras. He had poverty, he lost children, he lost a wife. Anyway, all I want written on there is not that none of my svarim, just that I learned Torah through the tsaras. Amelis b'Torah, I pushed through everything. So in this regard, Talmud Torah is different than anything else that we just discussed. Because Limud Torah is not totally in the final result. Everything else that we have in our lives are pretty much go by the result and the last thing that what came out of it. What was the result that you accomplished? For Lamashal, I actually had this happen to me recently. It's an interesting discussion in Chosh Mishpat, I guess, but I brought a couple months ago, I brought my phone to get one of these million stores here now. Somehow this place is more phone stores than any other place in the world. I'm not sure how. Must be a very good business. But so I brought my phone to get fixed by a guy. It was there for like 2-3 days. You check in to check on it. He's like, yeah, I'm still working on it. And finally, after 3 days, he came back to me and said, it's like, 200 shekel, but I wasn't able to fix it. So I was like, okay, I'll take the phone back. Now give me 200 shekel. I said, no, kach hazabaret. So like, that's how it works here. I'm like, that's not how it works here. No, you didn't fix the problem. Did you do anything positive? He's like, no, I didn't. I couldn't figure it out. But I worked hard at it. Like, absolutely not. Okay, we worked it out. But okay, yeah, he got 200 shekel from me. Whatever. Okay, I'm not kidding. No, he did not. I didn't get a penny from the dentist. Fine. Anyway, so the kitzer. So, but Masha Enke, by leaving the Torah, he would have been right. By Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu says that it's about the amelus. The amelus is, of course, we also have a goal and what we want to accomplish, and accomplishing is good. We want to have, but putting in the toiling is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us. We know the famous Gemara, Kishem shekibalti schar ladrisha, kach kibalti schar laprisha, that he was trying to darshan all the essence of the Torah, couldn't figure out one of them, and he said, okay, but I got the schar for that. Chavetz Chaim says that is the pshat in when we say, some people say it every day, or some people say at least by a siyum, we say, what do you mean they don't get schar? In fact, the Chavetz Chaim, but of course they get schar. I see all these guys on the streets, they get paid a ton. He says, no. In the amelus, they don't get. We get paid by Kadosh Baruch Hu just for being amel. Those guys, if they don't come out with a result, they don't get paid. They get nothing. They only get if they make a positive result. But just for the amelus that they did, the hard work of cutting wood and stuff, no. And I think it's this lack of yediyah. This is what causes so many people to make a mistake about limud Torah and people who learn Torah. This lack of yediyah of understanding that amelus and is in itself it's not a means to an end. It's in itself something chashuv. Is where people make mistakes, such as I think we discussed this once before, but it's chashuv to chazer over it. We've heard people call limud Torah. I don't know if anyone's heard it. Maybe it's a foreign word to you. We've heard them call something called leeches, where people don't have a plan, or they're not doing anything for society, or they shouldn't get any discounts because they don't do anything. They shouldn't get any financial discounts. All these things come from a lack of understanding of what limud Torah is all about. So why am I mentioning it here if we're all people who are learning Torah? Because we know Chazal say there's gimel dvarim tzrichin chizuk. One of them is limud Torah, and we need to discuss. And I would like to quote. It's a little bit scary, but I would like to quote from people who, I'm not going to say their names, but from certain people who have, these are verbatim quotes from people who are running, people very chashuv in society, especially here in Israel. Some people have actually been former prime ministers. I'm going to be quoting now. Okay, the first person I'm quoting is a former prime minister. He said the following: we cannot continue to fund a lifestyle that encourages people not to work. It is not a religious value to be poor and supported by the state. It is a tragedy for the state and for the Haredi community itself. End quote. I would say another one. The days when one group serves the country and pays taxes while another group just receives and says Torah is our profession are over. End quote. I would like to quote from somebody else who's also very high up in power in the government. The yeshivos have become a refugee for draft dodgers. We want to see them in the workforce, not sitting in a kollel collecting stipends from our own tax money. And one more. Those who study Torah from morning to night without core curriculum studies are creating a generation of poverty that will collapse the state of Israel. They are parasites on the productive economy. And there's more. I'm going to try to leave them out for now. But there's unfortunately a complete lack of hakara. I'm not saying anyone in this space matters feels this way. And I'm not trying to get involved in it, but I'm just the fact that this is being said in a public setting, and unfortunately, quite often, is something which we cannot become mushba from. It's something we cannot feel that limud Torah does nothing, it doesn't do anything, you're not helping, you're just a parasite. It's something that's chashuv to recognize. And also, there's also libna negaya to us, because sometimes people don't feel like that, but there's a shlav below it, which is, sometimes, I'm not sure anyone has ever gotten this before, but sometimes people ask, okay, you're learning, but when are you going to get out to actually get a real job? Okay, anyway, that might be a foreign concept for people. I've heard it myself. What about, it's nice you're learning, but did you get smicha yet? Because until you get that, you haven't done anything yet. I'm not saying smicha is not good, but there's something to itself in and of itself of learning. And when we see this parsha Shetiyu Amelim B'Torah, if to remember what we're doing here, every single day we're accomplishing, we have to feel proud of what we're doing and appreciate what we're doing. I would like to end off with one story, one ma'isa that just happened on a flight. So I was recently in Miami, that's for you, and I actually was about to board, we were actually boarding a Spirit, Alav Shalom, Spirit Airlines flight. Yes, just they're no longer with us, but actually the story is very relevant why I said Spirit, because as we're waiting online, we were obviously delayed. And we're delayed a couple hours, and all of a sudden there was an African-American lady who came over to myself and my wife and said, she's like, why do we keep doing this? So I don't know where this was going, but it was actually a great conversation, at which point I said, doing what? And she's like, why are we on Spirit? And I was like, oh. I was like, I mean, it was cheap. She's like, yeah, I know. I feel like we should just stop doing this. So they're always delayed. Anyways, I didn't tell her that. We didn't realize 3 weeks later they're going to be gone. But as we're waiting online, she then says to me the following. That part's irrelevant. The more relevant part is she then says to me, she says, you Jews do so much for society, but no one appreciates it. I said, well, what makes you say that? Jacqueline. I don't know if that was her name, but she then says, I'm sorry if anyone watching is your name is Jacqueline. It's a great name. She then says, Donnie, don't spit it out. She then says to me, she says, I always promised to be good to Jewish people. She mentioned a neighbor of hers who took care of her, but she said it's something fascinating to her that throughout society, the Jews have done so much, and yet people, she's like, they just hate back. And I was thinking, at least for us, the same thing, unfortunately, we can appreciate happens to Limud Torah. And the Gemara says already at the end of Ksuvos that there's going to be Gzeirus after Gzeirus on people who learn Torah. But it's something for us all to recognize, at least in ourselves, that don't forget you're doing so much for the world and for Klal Yisrael. And if anyone makes you, if you ever chas shalom feel otherwise, you have to remind yourself that this is what we are doing in this room is extremely chashuv, the most chashuv thing, and we're helping mamish save the world. And we should be zaycha to continue to steig and be alma Torah and to see Yeshua's b'karev.